Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. We're doing a little bit of a longer form video today, almost kind of like a podcast. I'm here with my good friend, my day one from the TikTok days back in 2021, Marcus, or otherwise known as Marcussi. How we doing, Marcus?
I'm doing great. It's sunny out in Massachusetts, which is a rarity these days, and playoff hockey's right around the corner, so that's all I've been looking forward to. So, let's get
Yep,
right
we
into
got
this.
one day before the Stanley Cup playoffs. Originally, were supposed to start Monday. They moved it up to Saturday, so we got to get all our hot takes out before the start of the playoffs. And today, we're going to be mainly looking at the first round. Obviously, the matchups were locked up last night after the crazy thing that happened with the Ducks beating the Vegas Golden Knights. The Blackhawks almost beat the Kings, then the Kings come back and force overtime, thus getting the matchup versus the Edmonton Oilers. So, first off, we're going to look at a matchup close to Marcus, the Bruins versus the Leafs. It is the third time that they've met in 6 years at this point, 7 years.
I want to say third in the last 6 and fourth in the last 11 years.
Yeah.
I know that. And yeah, that's such a, original 6 matchup. Bruins in their 100th year. Jack Edwards is retiring. There's no other way Bruins fans would have wanted this.
Yeah. So, Marcus, first off, you obviously know a lot more about Boston Bruins than me. So, what do you think about the series? What are your biggest fears? What do you think that you can exploit with Toronto Maple Leafs? And just overall, what's your pick?
Well, I think the biggest fear with the Maple Leafs is like that big core four of like Nylander, Marner, Matthews, Tavares. Like those guys can score, right? Matthews almost had 70 goals. We know that. But what we also know about the playoffs is that anything can happen, and any statistics you pull out doesn't really matter, right? So I think looking at this matchup, the Bruins would more prefer this matchup, considering other teams like Florida and Carolina you would play are more, I want to say, play the grittier style of hockey. The Bruins can sort of push around Toronto more, I want to say, with adding Pat Maroon. I know he's slower, but looking at the Bruins, I like this sort of matchup because people say Toronto's defense and goaltending is weaker, but then you look at the Bruins and it's like, oh, the goaltending's so good. We don't even know who to start for game one, or we don't even know how the rotation is. So I guess this is exactly how I would have wanted it as a Bruins fan. And, I'll be happy with however it turns out, because my expectations are nothing after
Yeah,
last
man,
year.
I've been saying this. I feel like both of these teams are not really serious contend. I love this series, but I feel like both of these teams are not that high level contenders this season. They don't have a ton of pressure on
No.
them. So in looking at it, I think, yeah, Toronto, I would definitely lean their forward core. Boston's forward core does kind of fall off a decent amount after a guy like Brad Marchand, and even he's no longer the elite guy. I wouldn't say that he's good as a Mitch Marner or William Nylander. So when looking at this, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think the Toronto Maple Leafs, if there ever was a year for them to like finally beat the Boston Bruins, I think it's by far this year, when looking at how not shallow Boston is, but compared to prior seasons, they had so much depth. Not saying Toronto has fantastic depth as well, but I think I kind of like Toronto in this series. I'm not going to lie.
It feels that way because, the Bruins have beaten them the last 3 times. And since the expansion era, it's been, I think, the last 6, right? Since 1959, the Bruins have been, whopping them, right? I can see that happening, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does, because the Maple Leafs hadn't won a first round playoff series since 2004 up until last year, when they beat, I don't want to call Tampa a Leviathan, but I mean, the Lightning, they're
Yeah,
always good
they
in the
made 3 straight
playoffs. They
cups.
have
Yeah,
that playoff pedigree.
for that.
Yeah, the 2 straight cups. And it's like Toronto was the one to beat them. We remember that overtime game winner. So I said it before, these aren't the choke artists that we know of before, right? So if I were the Bruins, I wouldn't be, stooping down to them. We did sweep them in the season series, but these two teams don't like each other, especially this year. They were beefing, so I can't wait to see what comes
If there
out of
was
that.
if there was like an X factor for both sides, in terms of one player, who would you pick?
Oh, geez. X factor for both sides. I mean, you could say like Toronto. You could obviously say any of their top 4 guys. I mean, Matthews just is coming off all those those goal scoring, but there's the narrative that he doesn't exactly show up in the playoffs. But I feel like he's the sort of guy that the Bruins are going to look to shut down. You know, I mean, he loves shooting. He's got a killer shot.
He's decent, yeah.
For the Bruins, an X factor would be either of the goaltenders. Whichever one catches fire, I would go with them. You know, Swayman and Omark are both equally awesome and amazing. It's just which one is going to. I feel like whichever one takes over could really help the Bruins get over.
Yeah,
That
it's pretty
hump.
interesting. Like last year, obviously, just ran with Linus Olmark. I think that they should start to platoon them on and off until one maybe gets a shutout, one maybe has a one goal against game, stops 40 saves. Then maybe you run with that guy. For me, the guys that I'm looking at is honestly for Toronto, a guy like TJ Brody that has had a pretty big down year. I think if he can step up and slow down the Bruins, he's been such a good defensive in prior years. I think he's going to be massive in terms of turning it around. For the Boston Bruins, similarly talking about Austin Matthews, I would go with a guy like Charlie Coyle. It's going to have to play some pretty big minutes against Toronto's top lines. If he can shut it down, I don't think that he needs to be an offensive dynamo by any stretch, but if he can play solid two-way hockey and just keep pucks out of his own net, I think Boston will have a good opportunity overall. But any last thoughts on that series?
Hey, yeah, no, you mentioned Coyle and Zaka. Just saying, like they've been amazing this year. They stepped up, awesome. I mean, I know they're not like superstars like Krejci and Bergeron, but they are solid,
Yeah, it
solid
is
guys.
crazy. Yeah, I think I saw your post how like they have more points this year than Bergeron and Krejci did last year.
That is
That
true.
that's pretty goddamn nuts. What's your final pick? What's your final pick on the series?
I'm gonna say either Bruins in 7 or Leafs in
You
6.
gotta
It
pick one.
goes
You
one
gotta
of
pick
two
one.
ways, and
No,
whenever
no,
it
no,
hits
you can't
games,
fence it.
Bruins in
Okay,
7. It always goes to 7
I'm
between
gonna
these two.
go Leafs in 6. I think they win one of the first two, then win both in Toronto. Then Boston wins Game 5. Then Toronto wins Game 6.
All right, I hear you.
Next up, do you want to keep? We'll
I
stick in the Atlantic Division. We're running through all the exciting series first. Then we might get some of the stinkers.
word.
But Battle of Florida, also a part 3 recently, although they didn't play last year. 2021, Tampa Bay won in 6 games. 2022, they absolutely dumped on the Panthers after they won the President's Trophy. This seems like a rubber match, in my opinion, in terms of Florida becoming the new Kings of Florida. Last year, go further in the playoffs, but before that, Tampa's been so goddamn dominant. So, what are your initial thoughts? What's your pick? Who do you think is going to have to really step up, and what weaknesses do you think these teams can exploit?
I think Florida's coached by Paul. This is a good coaching matchup, actually. I was going to point out because John Cooper's a good coach. Paul Maurice is like what 5th in like all-time coaching wins. So yeah, both these teams are. I think Paul Maurice is. Both these teams are really well coached. But what I see the differences is I look at Tampa. They still got that top 6. They still got Vasilevsky. They still got that sort of Stanley Cup veteran pedigree. They got playoff point. He's probably going to step up and pop off. But I look at Florida, man, they can really disrupt a team, especially in the neutral zone, especially like 5-on-5. But what Tampa can take advantage of is the 5-on-4. Their power play is insane. They move the puck so well. And I want to say like Kucherov is just like, he fiends off of that, right? So, they got all
Yeah,
that star power over there in Tampa. But if Florida could keep it 5-on-5, I feel like Florida could, take it. Just depends on how many guys are on the ice.
Yeah, I agree. I think the one thing that people aren't talking about enough in the series and just Tampa in general is not having Sergachev is so
Oh
goddamn
my
big. I don't
God.
see nearly enough people talking about it. When looking at previous teams to go on deep playoff runs, eventually win the Stanley Cup, you need that number 1 defense in which they have in Victor Hedman, but you also need that number 2. Petrangelo, Theodore, Tampa had Hedman, McDonough, and Sergachev when they won their cups. Colorado, Tays, Makar. I'm just not sure that Tampa has the overall defensive depth with the way Vasilevsky has been playing this regular season. He's obviously a beast in the playoffs, but I think Florida is going to take care of business in around 6 games. I think they just have far too much depth for Tampa Bay, especially when looking at their bottom 6s. Tampa has a fantastic top 6. Don't get me wrong, but their bottom 6 is still pretty abysmal outside of like Nick Paul has been a kind of a revelation as their 3rd line center, but beyond that, I think it's like Michael Esimont, like Janot has been a total bust in terms of them. So it's going to be a battle because these teams, Tampa has like the mental edge and it just has so much more success than them. But I think it's going to be very interesting. And I think Florida eventually gets it done in 6 or 7 games. What do you think?
I could see that too, but you talk about Tampa. Like, I mean, both these teams actually, you could just say like, have that sort of experience edge because Florida. I mean, they took it all the way to the Stanley Cup last year, right? So they want to get back there. The way I look at it is, I feel like Florida has the edge. I think they can really just take over a playoff game with their composure. They're one of those grittier teams that you don't want to play against. Oh my god, I forgot they also have like Vladimir Tarasenko. That is insane to me.
Yeah.
But you know, I feel like Florida's going to take this in 6. We also, I don't think we've mentioned Sergei Bobrovsky still at his age is playing phenomenal, goaltending.
Yeah, he should be a Vezina finalist this year.
Should
It's
be.
absolutely crazy.
So, I could see Florida taking it in a deeper series. Tampa's not going to make this easy for them, but I feel like a 6 or 7 game series for Florida and they would advance.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you mentioned that I didn't even think about. Like when they played previously, not saying Huberdeau was like the softest player of all time, but now compared to the Kachuk Florida Panthers, they definitely have more of a physical identity. Guys like Sam Bennett, that's an absolute dog.
Nick
Gustav
Cousins.
Forsling has really emerged since they ended up. Evan Rodriguez as well. Like they are far more physical and have matched that from Tampa Bay compared to 2021, 2022, when Tampa had that dominant third line of Barclay Goodrow, Yanni Gourde, Blake Coleman that would beat the shit out of you. So I think Florida just has more depth, more talent, as well as being as physical as the Tampa Bay. I wouldn't sleep on Tampa, but in terms of them going really far in the playoffs, I am pretty low on them. So next up, you want to go to the Metro Division now? Keep it in the Eastern Conference?
Might as well.
We'll start it off with my New York Islanders versus the Carolina Hurricanes. A lot of people are calling this a snooze fest. And I tend to agree. It is a pretty boring series. So when looking at this, obviously, Carolina is a heavy favorite by a decent amount. I saw The Athletic had it like 80% to 20% according to their model. I don't think it's that drastic. But Marcus, what do you think about this series?
Well, when you said boring, I can see what you mean because both these teams will try to wear you down until you make a mistake. I mean, I've seen it when both these teams have played my team, the Bruins. They wear you down, they force turnovers, they dump the puck in, they forecheck well. They do all those sort of textbook correct things, right? The Islanders and the Hurricanes. They both do that super well, right? They're very well coached, both of them. Again, you got, well, I was going to say Lane Lambert, but now they got Patrick Waugh. That guy took them. I mean, the Islanders weren't they? They were out of a playoff spot for quite a bit this season, and then they moved back in, right? So I look at this matchup. I mean, yeah, it's probably going to be a snooze fest, but I think whoever's going to, make that first mistake and lose that composure is going to probably, lose this series. I mean, Carolina, they got some studs too, like Aho, Teravainen. On the back end, their defense is pretty solid too. But I think I saw the Islanders got or they're getting Dobson back. You probably know more.
Yeah,
about that.
he'll be good to go for game 1. They're just being
And the
once they
Islanders
clinched, he wasn't
right. The Islanders are coming in 8-1-1. So I like riding the hot hand, but Carolina is just so deep. I feel like they need to make a deep playoff run. They got to get over the hump and make a Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, definitely, especially after trading for Jake Gensel. When looking at this, if you told me before the season that we were going to play the Hurricanes again, I probably would have been decently confident considering we had a clear advantage in net. I'm not sure that's the case anymore. Although Varley is playing fantastic, Frederick Anderson has been amazing since he returned. He has 951 in his last 10 or in his 10 games since returning, so that definitely scares me. And just when looking at Carolina overall, the 3 lines deep that they have of basically either very good first liners or like even their third liners could be second liners on most teams. There's just so much depth coming over the boards for Carolina. They're like third pair is like Dmitry Orlov and Jalen Chatfield. It's probably the best third pair in the entire NHL. They just have so much depth that I think it is going to be overwhelming. It is going to tire out the New York Islanders, a team that already can't generate a ton of offense on top of just dealing with what they're going to have to deal with defensively. I think it's going to be too much. Could Varley or Sorokin just stand on their head? It's definitely possible, but I think that this Carolina team is just the Islanders almost on steroids with so much more high-end offensive talent. And honestly, last year in the playoffs when they played, they didn't even have Svechnikov or Max Pacioretty. I know Pacioretty's not on the team anymore, but you bring in Gensel, you bring in Svechnikov back, as well as guys like Jarvis taking a massive step. I think this is probably going to be over in 5 or 6 games. What's your official prediction?
I feel like it's either the Islanders would make it a tougher series, but I feel like, yeah, 5 or 6 games seems legit. I don't know. I feel like I got to make these playoff picks so quickly when the
It's
games start
crazy. It's
tomorrow.
crazy.
What is with the
Yeah,
scheduling?
I
But
they
uh,
wanted to get ahead of it, ahead of the
I
NBA.
know, right? Son of a gun. I'd probably say Carolina in 6. I feel like the Islanders, they're going to make it a tough series, but yeah, like you said, Carolina is just New York on steroids. So I would
Yeah.
probably pick Carolina.
Yeah, and as you said before, yeah, it's crazy how like at this point an Eastern Conference final appearance would be pretty disappointing for them. They've made it so many have they made it 3 times now at this point? Obviously 2019
Uh,
last year.
I want to say,
Did they
yeah, they've made it a few times.
Yeah, so it's like they've had besides non-cup winners, they probably have the most playoff round wins out of anybody, or definitely out of the teams that have not made the Stanley Cup final. They're in this just weird spot of they got to get over the hump, and this year probably is one of their best chances when looking at the overall competition.
Twice over a streak of 5 playoff appearances, they've reached the Eastern Conference final.
Okay,
So
so just 2019 and 2023.
they are
All
one.
right, next
All
up,
right, go.
we'll keep it in the Metro Division. We got the New York Rangers versus the Washington Capitals. I think that this is probably the biggest talent discrepancy out of any single matchup. I made a video last night. The Rangers have the 4 best players in not Ovechkin. What do I say? Shesterkin, Fox, Panarin, Zibanejad. Then you probably was so funny.
Sorry, you said Ovechkin, which would have been like insane if the
Yeah.
Rangers had Ovechkin.
No, no, no. But yeah, they have like the 4 best players, then probably the next. It should be well overwhelming in terms of the Washington Capitals. Do you think that they have a chance with their minus 37 or 38 goal differential?
I was going to mention their minus 37 goal differential doesn't look good for them heading into the postseason, but one guy whose name I've been hearing a lot of when people talk about the Capitals is their goalie, Charlie Lindgren, right? I've seen his name a lot, and I feel like with goaltenders, they can sort of, take over, right? But do the Capitals have, those big X factors that they, used to? They're much older. Yeah, I mean, and the Rangers, they just won the President's Trophy, but, you know, I don't really see Washington really giving them much of a competition, when I look at the two teams on paper, right? It's the playoffs. Anything can happen. Who knows? OV goes off, but probably doesn't. The Rangers are star-studded with talent.
Yeah, if they're gonna have any chance, we talked about before with Tampa. Not saying the Rangers are like a horrible 5-on-5 team, but they'd have to take like basically no penalties. They'd have to play the soundest hockey of all time, the most defensive hockey of all time, and just grind out 2-1, 3-2 wins with Charlie Lindgren absolutely balling. He's never played a playoff game in his entire career, so that's a little bit concerning. But maybe that is more encouraging than like a Stuart Skinner that shat the bed last year. I think Carolina and the Islanders are probably the most boring series just because they maybe don't have the superstars that the Rangers have. But this series just seems like if there's a different game on, I'm definitely going to be throwing on
Yeah, I
the
don't
game. What about
really,
you?
I don't really, see much to look into this one. I mean, no offense to Washington. I mean, the fact that wild card race this year was insane, and the fact that it ended up Washington kind of surprised me. I want to say, especially with the fact that that goal differential really, when I look at it, I'm like, are you kidding me? You know what I mean? But hey, it's the playoffs, so anything can happen. But I got the Rangers winning in like 5.
Yeah, I saw something ridiculous with the Capitals that they were 22-10 in 1-goal games. Like they either won 1-goal games or got it to overtime. Like they just grinded out close games in terms of it. They got at least a point, and most of the time 2 points. Absolutely insane. But moving on, let's go over to the Western Conference. Dallas versus Vegas, in my opinion, by far the best matchup. I think this could be a conference final. I think these two teams are arguably the two most top 3 in terms of roster talent. I hate this considering Dallas is probably going to be my cup pick when looking at them 2 months ago. I'm probably not going to change, but they get like the hardest possible first round matchup. What do you think about this? Should I be nervous as a potential Dallas picker and probably better?
With the trade deadline Vegas had, I did not think that they were going to. I didn't see them finishing as the wild card too, especially them being the defending Stanley Cup champions. But hey, you don't have to. It doesn't matter where you finish. As long as you're in the playoffs, you're in the playoffs. And for Vegas, They got Thomas Hurdle, they got Noah Hannafin. They're so stacked. They've retained majority of that Stanley Cup champion winning team from last year, right? I would be, shaking in my boots if I were the Dallas Stars. I mean, Dallas on paper, they Spit and Chiclet said it. They have like almost five forward lines that could be run in this playoff, right? They're so deep. They're so deep on the forward core. And then, I liked when they got Chris Tanev too, right? That was a huge defensive pickup for them, and it's worked out for
Massive.
them in their favor. This series is going to be good. That's all I'm going to say. I feel like it's just going to go 7. Both these teams are going to go at it, and I can't wait to see what comes of it.
I just can't wait for the game for like the Elliott Friedman. I don't know which day they play first, but like the Mark Stone is expected to play.
Yeah.
And you're gonna see Dallas fans be like, "Fuck this shit! I hate this! God damn it!" It's gonna be so like they're gonna get the taste of what Winnipeg, I guess, saw last year. Winnipeg was crazy because he's from Winnipeg, so that was even worse. But it's gonna be absolutely mayhem if they end up pulling off this upset after the fantastic season that Dallas had. NHL fans on the whole are going to erupt. Now, in looking at this, I think there is something to the fact that Vegas maybe has the talent, but maybe not the chemistry quite yet because they didn't play very good down the stretch. They didn't have Mark Stone, don't get me wrong, but I think Dallas is definitely the more cohesive unit. I think for this, the series really comes down to Jake Ottinger, who has been playing better of late, but has been disappointing on the whole. He played great in the 2022 playoffs. Last year played pretty solid, did enough to get him to the Western Conference Finals. I think he's going to be the difference maker because he can play far better than potentially an Aiden Hill, who played great in the playoffs last year, or a Logan Thompson. Dallas is going to need that fantastic goaltending performance, considering Vegas almost does match them in terms of forward depth. And Vegas's top 3 defensemen are probably better than Dallas's top 3 defensemen. And I would probably take Dallas's depth overall in terms of defense, but they're very similar in terms of just being fantastically deep as well as having superstar talent. It's going to be great. I would pick right now Dallas in 7. I don't know if I'm going to pick them for the Stanley Cup final, considering I think they're going to kind of beat the shit out of each other.
Yeah, that's probably the scariest thing for you when you have Dallas as your cup pick is like a tough first round matchup. But at the same time, people say a tough first round matchup can really wake up a squad, right? We've seen Dallas make some deep runs. I mean, we remember in 2020 they played Tampa in the Stanley Cup final, but Vegas has also faced Dallas, and both these teams have faced off against each other the last 2 times. I think both of them were conference finals in the West. Vegas, I think, played them in 2023.
Yeah.
So both these guys have played each other down the road in deep playoff runs, right? You know what I mean? So they've seen each other before, but if you're trying to pick Dallas, I feel like it's a really good first round matchup where it's like, all right, here's a wake up call. We're warmed up for the rest of the stretch and whatnot. So
Yeah, it's one of those things where like obviously if you're going to win the Stanley Cup, you need to beat the best. I would have preferred them to be on the Pacific side of the bracket, and they got LA, so you either got Edmonton or the Vegas Golden Knights instead of Vegas and probably the Oilers in the Western Conference Finals. But yeah, that is going to be absolute war. But let's move on. I don't want to think about it anymore about stressing this. I could have a different cup pick when I post my video later tonight on my full predictions. Next up, I think that this is also a fantastic matchup. Doesn't have quite the allure of Dallas and Vegas. Colorado versus Winnipeg. Everything's telling me Winnipeg in this series when you look at the stats, when you look at just the overall teams. But I keep on thinking about the star power of Colorado, and the thought of it just doesn't compute in my head the fact that they could be potential back-to-back first-round exits.
Yeah, I was going to say Colorado, like you look at them, right? And it's like, okay, well, they won that cup in 2022. They're absolutely loaded. McKinnon's been having a career year.
Yeah, it was a dynasty loaded.
But it's like, Winnipeg's been having a good season too, right? But I feel like this is one of those toss-up matchups. You know what I mean? Like Winnipeg's been having stellar goaltending from Connor Hellebuck. Let's not lie. Probably, I mean, him and Scheifele got that extension, well deserved for both of them, by the way. But I look at Winnipeg and I'm like, this is one of those teams that could kind of sneak past the first round and really, I don't want to say surprise some people, but pleasantly be like, oh, Winnipeg's making a good dent. But then again, so could Colorado, right? Both these teams are really good, So I that's what I know of both sides, but can I really see Colorado just like McCarr, McKinnon, they got all those guys. I can't see them
Yeah.
missing this or just making it.
Yeah, it's
Sorry, go.
I said it last night. They're the exact opposite in a way. How Winnipeg has no superstars, but they have a shit ton
Right.
of depth. Uh, they have a fantastic goaltender. Colorado has superstars, not a ton of depth, definitely more than last year, but they have shit goaltending.
Yeah.
Everything points to Winnipeg. I shouldn't be factoring in 3 players over the other 16. It's
Right.
ridiculous. But when you look at the history of the NHL, most of the time the teams with the superstar talent tend to go further in the Stanley Cup playoffs. There's obviously exceptions. 2019 Blues, even last year's Vegas didn't have a ton of superstars. So yeah, I'm not really sure who's going to win this. I think it is going to go 7 games. Having home ice for Winnipeg, such a raucous crowd in Winnipeg with the whiteouts, that's definitely an advantage. I don't really know who's hungrier at this point. I would maybe lean Winnipeg, but I'm sure Colorado wants to prove a lot of people wrong after losing to Seattle last year. It's probably the closest series, in my opinion, in terms of talent. Maybe Boston and
Right.
Toronto.
I look at Winnipeg's forwards, some underrated guys. I look at like Alex Iafallo, Gabe Velarde. I mean, they acquired Sean Monahan. That was a pretty good pickup. Tyler Toffoli too. They bolstered that forward core if it already wasn't bolstered. So they got some dogs on that team, right? And they got that home ice advantage, like you said. When they do the whiteouts in Winnipeg, I bet it gets so loud there, man. You know what I mean? So, I mean,
Yeah.
this series could go either way, but I bet Colorado's a little salty and got a little chip on their shoulder about losing to Seattle last year for sure.
Yeah, you were talking about it like Winnipeg might sneak it, surprise people. I think honestly, even though I might end up picking Colorado, I think if you're a Winnipeg Jets fan, the Western Conference Finals is like the bare minimum that you should be expecting from this team. Although it's maybe not like realistic. They trade a first, they trade a second, they trade a third. Hellebuck's 30, 31, Scheifele's old. Like, if they can't win now, I think they have a ton of pressure on them in terms of like this core.
I can see that. Yeah. I would.
Their youngest core piece would be what? Kyle Connor. He's still 26, 27 at this point. They're not that young.
Kyle Connor's 27, but he's played in like 80% of, Winnipeg's like playoff games all time. Just a little stat for you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He debuted in 2017. Yeah, that makes sense. But Marcus with the fun fact. Any other fun? Where were the fun facts for the last 5 series?
I don't know. I
could have used a fun fact.
I was researching, I was doing a little research just to make myself sound a little smarter. And then I came across that sort of statistic. And I was like, oh, Kyle.
You were sitting on that.
I was sitting on that for a while.
As soon as you joined the call, you're like, come on, you're like, we start with Winnipeg, Colorado.
Hey, Redhead represent.
All right. Okay, moving on. An interesting series. I don't think this is going to get a ton of national media attention, but I think Nashville versus Vancouver, it's pretty interesting. It's definitely pretty interesting. Both of these teams don't make the playoffs last year. Vancouver's first time since 2020, since the bubble. Nashville's first time since 2022 when they got swept against Colorado, absolutely dismantled because they had a young Connor Ingram in net because Saros was hurt. What do you think about this series? Is Vancouver going to walk to it as a division winner, or is Nashville potentially going to pull off a massive upset?
You're right. Both these teams didn't make the playoffs last year, and both them surprised me making the playoffs this year, right? Vancouver's been absolutely balling out this season. They've got a ton of star-studded talent. But I look at Nashville, man, a lot of people have been talking about Nashville might be the upset pick of the first round. They're I don't want to say they're the favorite in this series, but they're sort of a favorite to upset when I've looked at the talk, so to speak. We remember ever since they canceled that U2 concert, they went on that crazy run, and I'm the biggest U2 fan, so that kind of pisses me off. But yeah, Nashville's got some. I want to say like older, experienced guys who've played in big playoff games. For example, Ryan O'Reilly's a huge piece that's played in some big playoff games. Won a Stanley Cup with St. Louis in 2019, and he's had a good season, especially this year. Philip Forsberg's another guy. He's their star guy. And you say Saros is healthy. So, that's good goaltending. But I don't know. I feel like Nashville could be an upset pick here. Vancouver hasn't seen a lot of playoff experience. As you said, they missed it last year. And, this is their first, I don't want to say, yeah, it might be, it's their first sight with this core, it feels like, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
for me, what it comes down to is Nashville past that first line. They play together, they play cohesive, they play solid both ways, but I don't think that they can nearly
Yeah,
match the
no.
offensive output of the Vancouver Canucks. Right now, I just pulled it up on Daily Faceoff. Nashville's first or second line center is
Oh,
Colton
Jesus.
Sissons, Jason Zucker on left wing, right wing Mark Jankowski, third line Novak's pretty solid. Evangelista is a nice rookie, Beauvillier, and then the fourth line's not that impressive. You compare that to a Vancouver, they had one of the best third lines in the entire NHL cooking this year. Second line, I think they're obviously not, I don't think they're going to put the lotto line together of the top three forwards. So they're going to be nice and balanced, even with Lindholm not playing to the level that he's expected to. He's still far better than a lot of pieces in the Nashville Predator middle six. If Nashville is going to win this, it's going to come down to Roman Josi in their power play, just cooking on like an astronomical. They're going to hit it like 40%. I think just Vancouver's overall depth is really going to come out and show during this series, and as a result, they would be my pick. I don't think
No,
you should.
yeah, absolutely. The way I look at it is right. We talk about, can a goaltender take a series? You know what I'm saying? Like Vancouver's got all that star-studded power. You just mentioned their depth is way better than Nashville's. Can Nashville really score on, Thatcher Demko? You never know. But stranger things have happened in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I was looking at it before, the day before we were going to talk about this, and a lot of people were talking about like, is Nashville the upset pick? Because Vancouver hasn't really seen a lot. This core hasn't really seen a lot of like playoff experience. They're a lot younger, so that's the way I was looking at it. So I was like, I wanted to point that out. But you make a good point.
Yeah, I'm maybe not high on Vancouver going further in the playoffs. If they got matched up against like the LA, I think they would have had a lot of trouble with that because LA does have far more forward depth in that playoff experience, that physicality. But yeah, I'm not sure Nashville can
Right.
bring it. But let's go to our last series, a three-peat, a three straight
Three
peat, unlike
straight.
Battle Florida, which is 3 and 4 years. Edmonton versus LA. I absolutely hate this series. I don't think it's going to be that close. I think Edmonton's probably going to take care of business. But Marcus, what do you think?
Well, the Kings had that head coaching change mid-season. I forget who it was, if you can remind me.
Jonas Hiller?
Um, what was it again?
Jonas
Yeah,
Hiller,
they
I
they
believe.
made they made that switch. There was the speculation that Pierre-Luc Dubois wasn't working out and everything, but they figured it out. They got back in the playoffs, and like you said, yay, a third time we get to see the Oilers taking on the Kings. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like McDavid at some point has got to he's going I feel like the Kings aren't going to beat the Oilers because I mean, the Oilers have had, a good season again. McDavid's got 100 assists. Zach Hyman's got like a 50-goal season. I mean, those two have been connecting well. I have Edmonton going far, so I'm not really thinking about this series much. And plus, in the past two times, Edmonton's been, you know, beat winning it. So I got Edmonton.
Yeah, the only way I can see this really happening is Cam Talbot. Maybe you could outplay Stuart Skinner. I'm not saying Stuart Skinner is a great goaltender, but I think if it were to happen, LA would have to get in the heads of Edmonton, get physical with them, cause Edmonton to take stupid penalties, and then maybe LA could exploit them. I do think LA is a decent team. If they can stick to their defensive principles, they can maybe slow down Connor McDavid, but at the sacrifice of their own offense. I think it would just be far too much. They wouldn't be able to still outscore Edmonton. So I think, especially with the emergence of a pair like Ekholm and Bouchard, I'm not sure LA can slow down McDavid while also putting enough goals up on the board in order to beat
Right.
him.
I feel like these two have seen each other a lot. You know what I mean? And I've always talked about how in the playoffs, well, in the regular season, you see one team and then, you got to go play another team. So you got to prepare for them. In the playoffs, you see a team enough, you start to figure out, their, what they're good at and what they're not good at. These two teams know each other very well from the past 2 years. So I'm looking forward to a good series between these two sides. They're not going to take it easy on each other, but I got Edmonton like, winning in six,
Yeah, I might even go
five. You
five,
never know.
man. I don't know.
You never know.
I could. I wish we got Edmonton versus Vegas, and then my Stars.
Dude, that could have been insane.
Sucks.
Eichel versus McDavid, those two guys from their same draft class, 1 and 2. Oh my God, that would have been nuts. Wait, they were 1 and 2, right? No, I forget.
Yeah, and they played last year.
That would have been insane to play. Oh my gosh. Sorry, it's still early for me. I haven't had my coffee. You got the coffee. I don't have.
Earlier. Yeah, of course. But let's talk about some other stuff. What right now would be your cup pick? And I'm not going to bind it to you. If you want to go make a different video later and you change it, I might change for the Dallas Stars. What would be your cup pick right now? And who would you have winning Conn Smythe? What's one player that you think is going to shit the bed? What's one player that you think is going to surprise?
Jeez, you got me looking at the bracket challenge thing, and I have yet to fill this dang thing out. My cup pick. You picked Dallas, right? They're at the top, but they got that tough first round matchup.
Again, I picked Dallas 2 months ago when after they got dogged by the Avs, nobody believed in them, and now everybody's hopping on board. I want that on record. Same thing happened with the Oilers last year.
Right. My cup pick. I don't know. It's so hard because every year the Stanley Cup playoffs, right? You do the bracket and it's like, oh, you feel good. And you look at it, it's like, okay, this makes sense. And then whatever happens, you don't know. I feel like it might be, I don't know. Something's telling me it might be Edmonton's year. You got me on the spot. I'm really feeling the Oilers this year. I don't know. I just think McDavid finally needs to lift that cup. Yeah. I mean, he finally needs to get his first.
Yeah, and especially with the contracts they got to deal with in the next couple of years. You got to get one soon before you're paying Draisaitl $14 million. Who would your Conn Smythe pick be in that situation? I assume Connor McDavid.
It'd probably be Connor McDavid. Or Zach Hyman. You never know. Like, you never know how many goals he's going to score, so is what it is.
Just net front. Every single one's primary assisted by Connor McDavid. He has 25. I'm probably gonna go Dallas. I go Jason Robertson. He didn't have the best playoffs last year. I think he's gonna step up this year. What's one player that you think is gonna shit the bed and we're gonna be like, oh my God, like I can't believe that he kind of let his team down.
To be honest, if I had to look at it, I don't know. I'm looking at over on the Eastern Conference side. I don't want to be that guy, but I'm gonna be that guy. It's got to be one of the Toronto top guys. Like, no. I gotta be one of that guy.
Clip that. When Austin, which one?
I mean, so Austin Matthews went off for 69 goals. If there's a team that could probably, I would hope if they would shut that down in Toronto. I say they're no longer the choke artists they are before, but I have yet to see Austin Matthews, sort of make that playoff presence. So I would go with him because I'm a Bruins fan and I don't like Toronto. Simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I'm going to say a first-round exit, star, I guess if I do have the Leafs probably winning, I would have to go with David Pastrnak. Oh. And he was slow. He was slow last year in the first. He didn't play that good last year. It was right? I guess I wouldn't be. Yeah,
last year it was it wasn't even Pasta or Marchand stepping up. It was Bertuzzi and Hall, and they were lower in the depth chart. And Pasternak's a guy who teams can sort of lock up if they can just keep him to the outside. Because once you get him inside, it's game over. It's game over for him. So, I mean, I could see that happening too. The Bruins don't really, their depth isn't as good as it was in previous years. So I see what you mean.
Okay, well, we recorded for almost 40 minutes, Marcus. Thank you for hopping on. You'll hop back on at some point. Maybe relatively soon. Maybe podcast starting up.
Jesus. We'll see. The knowledge level's off between us. You know how much study I'm going to have to do to get on your level of talk? Come on.
First take. Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless going back and forth, modern day. But anything you want to plug?
Anything I want to plug? Go Bruins. If that's something to plug. Go Bees. I hope they win. I love Mike. He's an absolute beast. Follow him. But you already do, so that doesn't even matter. But yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have my full prediction going through it later today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate it. Go check out all Marcus's stuff. What is it?
Marcussi.
Spell it out.
Marcussi _.
Send me your links after this. But okay, so you heard it first from the most knowledgeable guys. We're all going to be correct about every single prediction. Let us know in the comments. What do you think about this? Who's your Stanley Cup pick? Who do you think is going to absolutely flop? And I'll be seeing you in the next one. And me and Marcus will be seeing you down the line.